Welcome, everybody, to this wonderful virtual presentation that we're doing as a program of the Portage County Historical Society. My name is John Harry. I'm the Executive Director of PCHS. I just want to welcome you all to this presentation, and I think we're in store for a good one tonight. Even though we called it the dead of winter, it's like the warmest night we've had in a while, but it's still a good night to cozy up and watch a great history presentation. And we'll get to Jen Brilowski in just a second. I want to make a few announcements before we get to that point. And that is that we made a pretty big announcement yesterday, and that would be this concert. So this is the Portage County All-Star Reunion Concert, once in a lifetime. You can see the artist there, but basically headlined by Circus and Daddy Whiskers, some of the biggest names in music in the last 50-some years in Portage County. So we got literally the bands back together for this show, and so we hope you can join us March 22nd at the Springville Sports Barn in Plover. That used to be Golden Sands Skateland or Memories Banquet Hall. And so there's nostalgia in the space and nostalgia in the music. And so we hope you can join us for that. The concert tickets go on sale Friday for the general public, Thursday if you're a member. So I am going to put in the comments the link to become a member of the Portage County Historical Society, because that gets you early access and cheaper tickets. So that's a good thing. All of the funds raised during this concert will go to our upcoming exhibit called Rhythms of the River, the history of music in Portage County. And that will open in May at Heritage Park. So it's a big deal. These exhibits are not cheap to put on. And so we want to make sure we're paying homage to people and treating history the right way here in Portage County. And so this fundraising concert is a great opportunity to support that project. The other thing I wanted to note is that we have a sponsor for tonight's program, and that is Leap Nonprofit Consulting. They're a passionate organization, passionate about helping small to mid-sized nonprofits thrive by providing sustainable solutions and expert guidance on topics related to fundraising, board development, capital campaigns, and more. Leap empowers organizations to become more efficient and effective so their leaders can focus on driving positive change. And they're thrilled to support PCHS in this program. We're glad to have them on board as well. Our presenter tonight we can bring in now is Jen Brilowski. Welcome to the program, Jen. And Jen is Jen's the leader of the Point of the Past Facebook page. And Jen and her project there that you can find, I'll link to that in the comments as well, so you can make sure you can follow it. That won a public history award called the Win Rothman Award. And so that's gone to books, that's gone to things like different digital history projects. And a couple of years ago, it went to Jen. So she's an award-winning historian because of us, I'll say, and because she does a great job. The awards, by the way, we're going to be opening up the nomination window here in a couple days. So be on the lookout for that. If you're on our mailing list, you would find out. But Jen has led cemetery tours for us, mainly in the month of October, but we're looking at doing more of those. And she's our kind of de facto cemetery historian. So you're in for a great presentation where you don't have to journey out into the cold to see all these stones and stories tonight. We're going to let Jen take over right now. So at the end, we'll do a Q&A. So make sure you put those questions in the comments. But without further ado, Jen Brilowski, take it away.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me here. And thank you, Leap Nonprofit Consulting, for supporting me talking. John covered almost everything that I would have said. I'm the town cemetery lady. That is how I'm approached lately, and I'm okay with that. Always come up and say hi. I came into this hobby because I've always loved cemeteries, and after 2020, I needed safe places to get outside, and it grew from there. So you'll learn more about me and what I do and the cleaning and all that stuff as we go through, but I think that we can just start with the presentation. So just a little caveat. This is like a sampler, okay? We're going to get little tidbits about people, little bits about some of the cemeteries. There's at least 67 cemeteries in Portage County. Even if I wanted, I couldn't cover them all. So either I have to do this again or just keep doing tours to cover everything that I really want to talk about. But to start, we're going to start at the oldest cemetery. And oldest is relative because there are parish cemeteries and there are small cemeteries and different spots. But this is the oldest one where as smaller ones became defunct or they got built up around it, Union Cemetery became the city cemetery. It's much older than the sign there, 1927. And some of you may remember a few years ago, the sign went missing and was recovered. And we're very grateful for that because it's a landmark. As other larger cemeteries were built, Union Cemetery became less used, and a lot of people were actually reinterred. Reinterment used to be extremely common because people would move or the city would grow. And so now we get a little bit squeamish about it. But back then, it really wasn't a big deal, and families wanted that to stay together. So by the early 1900s, Union Cemetery had fallen into disrepair. It wasn't being used as much. And concerned citizens stepped up. And this is a pattern you're going to see. When things start to fall apart, it's the people that come together. So groups of people came together and they saved the cemetery. It didn't last, though. And in the 1930s, after 5 years of disrepair and neglect, the city said, okay, we need to take this over. And they did, and they still continue to run it. That just means selling the plots. They do the lawn management, things like that. So in the late 1930s, 1937, Union Cemetery is near the water tower, and the water main needed to go through. And so there was a lot of negotiating and a lot of planning that went into that because obviously people did not want the earth disrupted. And after a lot of care, including from Councilman Ben Dagno, whose house I now live in, deals were made, people were soothed, 2 people were moved to Forest Cemetery, and the water line went through. Now from the street, it looks the same, very similar. You can tell the sign is a little bit battered, and that's okay. It has it's earned its rust. But as you go into this cemetery or any of the older cemeteries, you really start to see the need for care, which is really what I discovered when I started exploring in 2021. For instance, this is the family plot of the McGreer family. And Hugh McGreer was one of the original lumberman pioneers. And I don't assume that everybody goes and reads about like 1850s lumber history, because I never thought that I would do that. But he was one of the first here. There's speculation that he built one of the earliest mills at Jordan, helped build the first house, things like that. In 1846, he was listed as one of the 162 white men living here in Portage County. At that time, there were 40 women and 2 females of color. They were Native women employed by Abraham Brawley and his family. So the town was small, but Hugh was here. He died in April 1873 and is buried here at Union Cemetery with his wife and several children. Some of his children lived well into adulthood, but most of them died in youth or before their mid-20s. So looking at this, one of the important founders of our town, really, and things are in disrepair and need a lot of care. And there's care that we can do and care that we can't do and care that we can look forward to doing. So, anticipate learning a little bit more about that so that we can help families like Hugh. Here's a couple more that need a little bit of care. On the left are stones that I didn't get the names off of because it takes a lot of work. But on the right, that is Mandana Bliss of Bliss Avenue. She was, I believe, like the first white child born here, if I'm correct. I know she was one of the first women here in Portage County for sure. That stone has some damage. It is not safe to clean. A lot of these old stones are tippy, are very heavy. You really need to proceed with caution when you look at them. Don't lean on, touch, push, clean any stones that you're not certain that they're stable, because you can and will get seriously injured. In 2021, I've met Samuel Metcalf, and I honestly don't know much about him because he died in the 1860s. He wasn't in the newspaper very much. There were a couple mentions of him. But all I did to clean this stone was give it a spray and walk away. These old marble stones are deteriorating. They're old and they're more gentle, porous and soft than some of the others, and you really need to be gentle. But in just letting time do its thing, he looks much better. We also have Edwin Bennett, and he and his family are buried near the back of Union Cemetery. You can kind of see the fence and the building behind it. He died after a short illness in 1867. He raised a family with his wife, Judith, and together with 5 of their children, they're buried here in Union. And her stone is so beautiful to me. I just really love the way it turned out. I know that Judith was born in Ireland on March 24th, 1825, and that she died shortly after giving birth to twins in March 1866. And again, I don't believe the twins survived. Infant mortality was just the way it was. So there's a lot of tragedy and grief, but bringing some of this beauty back really makes me feel good. And I hope that when you see them, you can read their names and say hi. This is an important stone to me, because not as much because of who it is, because of what it brought to me is more the thing. This is a stone of Roswell Blanchard. And if you are a point history aficionado, you may recognize the name. He was another very early pioneer here in Stevens Point. And I met him before I really knew who he was through a Find a Grave request. Find a Grave is a site where it catalogs all of the burials in cemeteries, and people can request photos, people can add information, and I do a lot connecting people to their families, adding information when I can. But I also try to answer requests. So there was a request from Kristen, who is a descendant, a 4th great granddaughter of Roswell, and she had some questions about his stone because it's a large stone and there's 2 people on it, he and his daughter. We didn't know where his stone was at first because it was so dirty we couldn't tell. And so with Kristen's permission, I went and I explored, and I was given permission to clean this stone. And I think it's 8 or 9 feet. It's thin, but it's a tall one. And so I was just delighted to be able to meet him through that. Kristen also sent me their family register. It shows Roswell and his siblings, the parents being born, just a really cool piece of family history that was shared with me. Also of note is that Roswell's wife was Lydia Newton. She was directly descended from Sir Isaac Newton's uncle, Richard Newton. And I actually did go and trace the ancestry tree back, and it was really cool. And there's a lot of Newtons in between, but we can do that now, and we can make those connections to the people who came before us. And I just love it. Roswell was a cabinet maker. He was likely the first undertaker in the city. Furniture makers became the casket makers and the undertakers, especially in the early days. Roswell's shop was on Main Street, downtown. The location is where the downtown plaza is, which is the little mall thing, between the coffee shop and Lier's Jewelers. So that is where Roswell started his business. Then after his death, his son ran it and continued to run it until selling it to Henry Boston. The Boston became Boston Furniture and Undertaking. And Boston Funeral Home is still here, still running. And that was really cool thing for me to discover, because I know a little bit about the history of the Boston family and the funeral home, because it kind of ties into what I do. But to discover that someone else had established that business was really, really kind of cool. The reason most people know about Roswell is that he was murdered. I'm not going to go into this in detail because, as you can see, there is a lot of information about, and through all the years, the story has come out, but it was a case of mistaken identity. He was mistaken apparently for Mr. Carner, a wealthier man who was supposed to be coming on the coach at the same time but was delayed. People were tried. No one was ever found guilty. His body was thrown into the river after he was murdered and not recovered until the next spring. His family stayed and continued. But as you can see, from people like Malcolm Roshold and Wendell Nelson have done a lot of work through the years to uncover the story and put it together. So I could do a whole talk about Roswell Blanchard and the Blanchard family, but there's so much, and so many people cared about this. Mostly, I am grateful that he was recovered and that that his family didn't have to wonder forever where he ended up. This is a before and after. The before is in 2021. It was in July. And then the after is yesterday. And it was cold yesterday. As you can see, it's much whiter. I could clean it again, but it wouldn't benefit it. It's legible now. We can read it. We can see everything we need to see. And for Roswell's family, they were able to see this is his marker. His marker wasn't actually missing. It was just hard to read. And so we now where he is. So as the cemeteries fell into disrepair, different groups would come together to help to uncover the mysteries, because before the internet, it was a lot harder to determine who was buried where and who they were connected to and why they mattered. It's really easy for me now. In 1976, when these gentlemen were out at Forest Cemetery trying to uncover the mysteries of the resting place for the Grand Army soldiers from the Union, they had to do a lot more legwork than I have to do now, especially because I can fall back on their research, which taught me that this block was bought by the Grand Army of the Republic Post 156, which is the equivalent of like the American Legion. And they bought the parcel of land for $75. And they got it to bury soldiers who didn't have the means to bury themselves, or their families couldn't afford it. They reinterred some people from other places. There are some unmarked soldiers in this section still. And even from 1976, things have not come up. Those records may be lost. They may be in somebody's attic. They may have gone to Goodwill. Or maybe we're going to uncover them. But in the 20s and 30s, there were all these other groups of people coming together wanting to care for the cemeteries. And as I mentioned, all these little towns, townships, parishes, there were so many cemeteries, and there still are, but most of them aren't active or as active anymore. So in the 1920s and 30s, there was a big surge of these associations forming. And unfortunately, just as times changed and the economy changed, it wasn't sustainable for these organizations to care for the cemeteries. And by the 1950s or so, many of these cemeteries were untended, in need of care, and a lot of them are still pretty run down. But there's some good things that come out of it too. In the 1970s, the county's Poor Farm Cemetery was rediscovered in the middle of a hayfield. And through hard work and effort and a lot of caring community members, a new marker was set and dedicated, and it has the names of everyone believed to be buried there from the Poor Farm at the Portage County Cemetery. This is another one that deserves so much more time and attention. But to go from being forgotten in the middle of a hayfield to being recognized and remembered and honored is really, really important. And I'm grateful that that happened when it did, before they were lost forever. 70s, 1990s, again, it just every 20 or 30 years, things start to pop up in the paper, and I am indebted to these people for the work they did. There was a couple that went through in the 70s and copied the inscriptions from every tombstone in Portage County. William F. Taylor there has a circus theme one in Forest Cemetery. There's just so many different people who have cared, but before the internet, again, it was harder to keep those resources in everybody's hands. And even now, that's why I'm going to make sure anything I uncover goes to the Historical Society or goes to the people in the families, because it doesn't do any good for me to do all of this fun and joyful and interesting work to then just let it go and have somebody else do the same work in 20 or 30 years. So I'm really, really devoted to making sure these stories stick around for us. And look, here I am. I don't seek the attention, but I welcome it, because it does bring attention to my cemeteries and my people. And it does show me how much all of these people really do care about the cemeteries, the people that came before, and the history. At first, I thought I was the weird one, and I've come to learn, no, there are hundreds, thousands of us who love these stories, love these people, and love these places. Let's go to an old cemetery. We're going to hang out with the Catholics for a while. Like, I promise, they're cool. St. Peter's is another one of our older cemeteries here in Portage County. The burials started in the 1870s. This photo is obviously significantly newer than that. I'm grateful to the Historical Society and Cheyenne, who helped me gather some photos of cemeteries from yesteryear. I was happy to see that this one also looks very similar to how it did before. Part of that is that St. Peter's isn't as used anymore because it's on Old Wausau Road on the banks of the Wisconsin River. At some point, they said, we need to quit burying people here because we don't want erosion to bring this beautiful cemetery into the river. That would be pretty bad for all concerned. But the Catholic Cemetery Association cares for it. There are many remarkable stones. I was drawn to it because the Georgella stone, and the DZIUR, that's Georgella. That is my fourth great grandparents, Polish immigrants. So if you're a Georgella or descended from them, hi, we're cousins. But I found them and cleaned that stone also in 2021. And next to them, you can see Michael Kalinowski and Anastasia and other family behind them. And I really like this photo because you can tell the difference of the ones that I cleaned and the ones that I didn't. And the Georgella stone, I scrubbed a little bit, but the Kalinowski ones were just sprayed and left because, again, that marble is soft, and the cleaner that I use, D2, does most of the work for me, which is awesome. So on this hill, it just stretches on and on and on. In this photo to the right is the river. It is run down. There are families that aren't here anymore. There's just things that change, and there's not much we can do about it. But there are still a lot that are tended, are visited. And if you look in the distance, you can see a bright white stone shining there. I wonder how that happened. I was lucky enough to find that I am wonderful friends with a descendant of John Guzman here. John was the Americanized name that he went by. And like a lot of them, they had their Americanized name that they were called, but then on their gravestones, they would use the Polish or original spelling. Not going to talk about him as much. I just wanted to, again, show you the difference in the stone and just mark the mower damage on the base. And it's inevitable. It happens. But mower damage is a big cause for concern in older cemeteries. And you get what you get, and it's hard to mow a regular lawn. It's really got to be hard to mow a graveyard. But if you see scratches, marks on bases like that, that's from the lawnmowers, not from vandals or something. One of the really cool things in this cemetery is that many of the stones are in Polish. Francesca here is no longer at St. Peter's. Family oral history says that she was reinterred at St. Bronislava's with her husband, but her old stone still is here. And I actually sprayed this one too because it was so beautiful. And the translation, here rests deceased, begging passerby for prayers. So just really, if you love cemeteries, you love Poland, you love cool headstones, St. Peter's Cemetery is really a good spot to visit. Another Catholic cemetery is St. Joseph's. It was established in 1891, and it's on the other side of town, on the east side instead of the west side. It has just under 1,500 burials in it, but now it's kind of attached to Guardian Angel. Though it's one of the newest cemeteries, because of our large Catholic population here in Portage County, it's now the largest here with more than 9,600 burials. And it kind of goes together with St. Joseph's. Some people think they're all one, but St. Joseph's is actually its own separate entity still. This cemetery has mostly smaller monuments. There are some larger ones. There is a columnarium now for the cremated remains. It is very well kept, and there's some really interesting history. I honestly don't spend as much time in this one because there are people close to me in it. I go to cemeteries to meet different people, to discover things, and that's harder to do when you're sad about grandma. So I've been exploring some of the other cemeteries more than Guardian Angel, but they're not going anywhere. I have time, they have time, so I will be spending more time here. It was established because in 1914, St. Peter's Church realized they needed more cemetery space. A lot of the Polish population was moving out to the east of town, and churches were being built out there, so they needed another cemetery. This was the old Wheelock farm. Wheelocks were a pioneer family, and in 1914, when they bought this land, these 20 acres for $2,000, can you imagine? It was just a field, and it sat that way for a couple of years until 1916, when people organized and they started a movement together to put up a proper fence, to lay out the grounds, to start organizing the plots and selling them so that they could bury their dead there. The first burial was Anastasia Olszewski here, and she was born in 1870 in German Poland. She married Frank Olszewski in 1888 in Chicago, and they moved here in 1893. Frank worked as a grocery clerk, and Anastasia was the mother of 5. She was sent to the state hospital in Oshkosh, then the asylum in Appleton, before spending several years as an inmate at the Wood County Asylum. I always cringe a little when I read those, but she had TB, tuberculosis, and it's highly contagious, right? They did not have protection against it. So people who had TB often had it for years and needed to be out of the general population for everybody's safety. So she did die of TB, and was the first burial at Guardian Angel. Now, if you look like at Find a Grave, a list of the burials there, she's not the first. And the reason for that is, of course, because about 60 people were reinterred from St. Peter's, from other rural cemeteries. But if Guardian Angel is the biggest, what's the smallest? Well, I'm not sure for sure, but in the running would be the Isaac Ferris plot. It's on the banks of the Wisconsin River on West River Drive. Maybe you've seen it. Isaac, or Ike as he was known, was a river pilot in the very early days of Portage County, and he was a very popular man and known to have considerable intelligence. He is the only burial here, and that wasn't uncommon. If he had a small home there, which they believe he did, he was buried there. There was a picket fence and a wooden marker that deteriorated, and people kind of forgot or were curious. So in 1917, led by P.H. Cashin, they decided they wanted to build a fence and give him a marker. And what's remarkable to me about this is how people came together. The fundraising was so impressive. It was mentioned in the paper on May 7th, and by May 22nd, all of the money was raised, $60. That was a lot of money in 1917, but they did it that fast. By August 17th of the same year, the fence and memorial were finished and still stand today. He had no family besides a young daughter, and when he died, he told people he hoped she was cared for. She was adopted. There's a lot of speculation. Unfortunately, what happened to her is unknown, but it's believed that friends cared for her. How about some more Catholics? This is St. Stephen's. This is another really old one. This one's been in use since the Civil War. So this predates Guardian Angel and St. Joseph's. It is still active. There's close to 3,400 burials here. And these are the gates on Minnesota Avenue. And in the 1950s, there was great cemetery debate again, but this was because they wanted to reroute Minnesota Avenue to build these gates and create a beautiful entrance to the cemetery. There were a lot of conditions. McLaughlin Park, which is behind it if you're looking at it the way I am, was created at the same time. The early burials are mostly Irish immigrants. Some of the wealthier Catholic community members that you may have heard of are here, including P.J. Jacobs, his father, their families, Glennons, O'Keefe's, Krems, Leahy's, and many more. Lots of Irish names. So if you have Irish heritage, this is where you want to go explore. I love this cemetery because it is easy to walk. It is plowed in the winter. There's a mix of old and new and large and small, all different kinds of monuments. And there's even a couple of mausoleums, including a large one for the Anson family. Leonard Anson was the son of Jesse Anson, who is buried in Forest Cemetery. I've talked about him on one of my past tours. Jesse and Maria were proud but poor farmers that earned their living by the sweat of their brow, according to their great-grandson and family lore. It seems likely then that Leonard converted to Catholicism when he married Hannah, because her family, the Mehans, are also buried there in St. Stephen's. Leonard attended school here, but at the age of 16, he became the youngest man in the area to join the Union effort. Like, he could barely get in there, but he did it. So he joined, and after the war, he returned home and started working in the lumber business. He took 2 trips down the river and spent 2 winters in the woods. So he learned a lot, he changed a lot, and the war had changed him. He told, he didn't quite have his path, it didn't seem like, but a story he told later was that he would never play cards because he saw so many Union soldiers playing cards around campfires for hours and hours and hours. He couldn't stomach it anymore. But the lumber, that experience and knowledge showed him the possibilities of the industry. And so he decided to attend business school in Chicago. And he took his skills and his education and his drive and became a multimillionaire. He moved up to Merrill and lived most of his life there. He had numerous lumber companies. Like, I would just have to list them for you. He was a bank president. He did many other things, but he was also really philanthropic. He and his wife donated $30,000 to get the Holy Cross Hospital in Merrill built in 1927. In 2025 dollars, that's equivalent to $540,000. So it wasn't pocket change. He really gave. He and his son both served as mayor. Leonard and his wife donated to their Merrill church as well and offered many great things to that. That was St. Francis. And when they celebrated 50 years of marriage, they donated the funds for a pipe organ for St. Stephen's Church here in Stevens Point, because that's where they had been married 50 years before, and they wanted to share a gift. He also once saved a boy from drowning in Merrill. And it was, old newspapers you take some of them with a grain of salt. So it's like, rich man saves drowning boy. But the story goes, he was driving over the bridge and heard the boy's cries. So he told his driver to stop. And he took off his coat, jumped in the river, and saved the boy just as he was going under for the second time. So he was a good man doing good things. In addition to their home in Merrill, which is still standing on Cottage Street, the family had a winter home in Miami. In 1927, Leonard died there very suddenly. He was only ill about an hour. He had been ill, but not seriously ill. And so he was mourned far and wide. All across the country, newspapers announced his death and grieved him. And really, as you can see, he was mostly known for the lumber and for being a very, very young man when he joined the Civil War to fight the Confederacy. After he died, in his memory, his wife, Hannah, donated $100,000 to fund a scholarship for young men from Merrill to attend Notre Dame University. And it continues to this day. It's a full ride scholarship for 4 years. All expenses. They were laundry, food, everything. It was only for men until 2000. In 2000, the first woman received the award, and others have since then. But every year, they have offered this. It hasn't been accepted every year. There's been a couple years it wasn't granted, but Merrill, Wisconsin is a small town. And I lived there for a few years. And this is an incredible gift to a community. And people who have received this have gone on and done really remarkable things. When Hannah died at the age of 89 in Merrill, she was brought to the mausoleum to be interred with her husband and her infant son. When I was doing my research, she wasn't on this list. I didn't see her on Find a Grave. So that led me down my favorite little rabbit holes where I was looking for obituaries and burial information. And it said, yes, she was in fact in the mausoleum with her husband and their infant son. And so I was able to create her entry, connect her to her husband and her children. And then it connects with parents and sisters. And it might seem like a small thing, but I feel like I'm putting these families back together. I'm giving them back. And you don't get to do this often. There has been some really hardworking people that created all these entries, but this one I got to do. Now we're going to the southeast corner of this county, way down. And disclaimer, I wasn't able to make it to Greenvale Cemetery, but luckily my kids, Elle and Liz, and their dad were kind enough to go and grab me a few photos. Thank you guys. I look forward to getting out there. It's also known as the DOP Cemetery, DOPP. the name, and it's on Highway 22 in Belmont. It's a very small cemetery with about 239 marked burials. And I don't know how this story found me. And if you've ever listened to me talk about this before, I talk about how people find me. And I don't question it now. I just go with it. And it's happened to me a couple of times recently, and including yesterday, where there's just all these threads that connect me or my family or my house to the people that just pop out and that I need to talk about. So I found them, and this isn't a place we would probably ever do a tour, right? It's small and it's out of the way. It would be hard to get to. So we're going to talk about them here. And I'm going to warn you, this is one of the sadder stories I've ever uncovered. And we will sit with that for a second for them. In 1926, Alan, a 10-year-old boy, and his sister Alta ran down to the pond by their home. They were really excited because it had frozen over. It was February, and they were excited to ice skate. Alan ran out onto the ice, and he was okay at first, but once he got 20 to 30 feet out, he broke through. So little Alta, 8, 9 years old, ran to the house to get her parents. Her father, Forrest, came down, and he also fell in. Coming to save them was the mother, Eliza, and she had a piece of wood she was going to try to prop to keep from falling in, and it didn't work. There was another daughter there, and they were young. They were like 6 and 8 years old, and there was an 18-month-old baby girl at home too. The kids had been instructed to not use the phone, and sweet Alta didn't. What she did is she put the baby to bed. She took care of everything she could. She tried to light a fire, but she couldn't. She wasn't able to cook dinner, but she did all she could to care for her little sisters. And she would go down to the water and cry, "Mama, Mama, are you dead?" And then she would come back and wait. In the morning, she wrote a letter to her Aunt Ella in the neighborhood, and I'll read that to you. It's on the screen. "Dear Aunt Ella," said the letter, which Alta wrote to Mrs. Theron Whipple of Lanark, Thursday evening after she had seen her parents and her brother drown. "Alan fell in the pond, and then Daddy went to help Alan, and he fell in, and Mother went to help, and she fell in, and we don't know for sure, but we think they're dead. I cried and I cried, but I can't help it. We were thinking how awful that would be. Love from Alta." The last words were scrawled as though tears could no longer be stayed. The letter, carefully folded and placed in a tiny envelope taken from a child's treasure of stationery, was stamped and addressed, "From Alta to Aunt Ella." Early in the morning, she placed it in the mailbox and waited for the mailman to come. Lucky for Alta and the other girls, a 13-year-old neighbor boy came by, and he saw that the fire was out, and he started the fire, and they told him what happened, and he got help. The mailman came by, but the girls were orphaned. In the photo, you see Aunt Ella and Alta and Theta. Aunt Ella adopted those two girls, and the baby, Belva, went to a different aunt and uncle and was raised. The Rice family were buried together, including one large hole dug by the community members that took them all day and into the night so they could be buried the next afternoon. They're buried with Forrest's parents, James and Sarah. Whew, I told you, right? You can't imagine what those little children went through. And they all lived into adulthood and married, but tragedy wasn't over. Alta was scarred. certainly from what she'd witnessed and her experiences after. And in 1961, she attempted suicide with a gun, but failed. But in November 1966, Alta drowned herself in the Wolf River near Fremont. She disappeared. They couldn't find her. They found her car, and then they found her in like 20 feet of water. Yeah. I didn't dig too much into this family out of respect. I couldn't pry. I learned, that Theta lived in the Fox Valley as well. Belva lived a long life. But I didn't dig too much. At some point, I will visit them if they keep tugging at me, and we'll see if I learn more. But sometimes we just need to sit with these. And yeah. We're going to move on to a little bit happier thing, to my happy place, to Forest Cemetery. If you've listened to me at all, you know that this is true. I spend a lot of time here. I was there today in the brisk wind, but it is lovely. It is acres and acres of trees and more flowers every year. I keep trying, and I have cleaned a lot of stones in this cemetery and met a lot of people. This cemetery was established in about 1853 by General Albert Ellis. He also helped found the Episcopal Church, and when his daughters asked him to help create a cemetery, he obliged. He got the land, but then those daughters cleaned the land and prepped it. This is the Ellis family plot. It faces Patch Street, and the memorial window in the Episcopal Church. I was in there for a rummage sale. It's now privately owned, and I was able to get some pictures of the windows. Not great pictures, but pictures. I also sprayed the small stones here at the Ellis plot. The large stone is actually not necessarily the family stone. It was for a young son of Ellis's that died, and then the rest of the family is buried around him. This is exciting. This is a photo provided to me by the Portage County Historical Society, and I wanted to see, like, how different does it look? And it's cool because it's the same but different. A big difference you're going to notice is fewer trees and fewer curbs. In the 1990s, without permission, someone seeking to save money pulled out a lot of curbs in Forest Cemetery. Every section used to be curbed. Now, not so much. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit so you can see the difference. You can see the curbs there in front of the tall Morgan stone. And you can see how much sinking has happened in the years since. This photo, I believe, is from 1941, if I'm correct. So, we're looking at 80 years. This is another one, another angle, and this is Albertine. This was a fun, because I was like, ooh, who is that? And I was zooming in and I figured it out. And then I said, oh, wait, I cleaned her stone. As she was a woman, we don't know much about her, right? Because that's the way it was. But her husband, Albert, was born in Prussia in 1821 and came here in 1856. He worked the rivers at Owen Clark's mill, served in the Civil War, and was proud to be one of the first ones to join to fight. His obituary only mentions his wife to say she died 23 years before he did, and he died in 1896. So this is how it looked today. And it was hard to get the angle right on this one because there was so many more trees back then, and also summer versus winter. But I think you get the idea. They had honeysuckle bushes all throughout the cemetery for a time, but then either they died or they realized how invasive they were and they removed them. This is what Albertine looked like when I found her in 2022. And this is what she looked like after I sprayed and gently scrubbed this stone. There was a lot of growth. And so there are safe brushes that you can use on stones, but you always want to use the least amount of pressure, the least harsh methods that you can. That means natural soft bristle brushes. That means soft plastic scrapers. Wooden skewers are great for getting in letters or fine detail work. But really, I use a approved product called D2 Biological Cleaner. And this is what it looks like. And D2 is not cheap, but it's worth it. And a quart like this would do, I could probably do 12 to 15 stones that size with this. So you spray it on, onto a dry stone, and it absorbs in, all right? Like the stone after it's cut is like a sponge. So it pulls the cleaner in, and the D2 is going to clean the biological growth, which is growing out of the stone like a plant out of soil. So you can just spray this on, and in time, it's going to remove everything. If you do a little bit of scrubbing or scraping, it's going to be a little bit quicker, but it's absolutely not necessary. You should never, ever, ever use any household cleaners. No soaps, no detergents, no power washers, sanders, grinders, anything power you don't want to use on these stones. Less is always more. Do no harm. You should technically have permission to touch any stone. You're taking a risk if somebody comes and doesn't like it. So I could talk about cleaning forever, but people always ask what I use, and it's D2. And I will be fundraising for D2 for 2025 soon. So if you're not a stone cleaner, but you want clean stones, I would be happy to help you out. This is how it looked today. Those black streaks are deep growth, and another dose of D2 would get it out, but time might also do it. So I'm just letting it be because it looks so much better. This is another before and after at Forest Cemetery. And this is the first stone I cleaned there. And this is a little guy, a child, Walter Van Houten. And this stone is remarkable. It looks so beautiful. You can see it from across the cemetery now. And an interesting fact about Walter is that his mother was one of three daughters of Lemuel Harvey, who came to Stevens Point. He was a lumberman. He worked with Matthew Wadley, who was like a big lumberman. But Lemuel never really settled here, but three of his daughters came here, got married, and raised their families here. So Matthew Wadley was one of them, and this was another. Now, this is a little different because this is the Spalenka family, and they are not buried in Stevens Point. Frank's father, I believe, he's at Guardian Angel. His parents were originally at St. Peter's, but were moved to Guardian Angel. So why do I have the Spalenkas here? Because I was learning about Forest Cemetery. I read an article and I found the name. And I'm not going to lie, it's a great name. As a Brilowski here, I love good names. And so I said, well, who is Frank? And Frank was an architect, a contractor, and he built so much of our town. Like, he deserves a presentation of his own. He deserves a chapter in a book. And who knows, maybe that'll happen. We'll see how bored I get. But he was born in Czechoslovakia in 1883. The family came to the United States not long after and came to Stevens Point in 1886, where his father, John, was a masonry contractor, and he was very well known for his work as well. After Frank worked as an apprentice in Chicago, he returned to central Wisconsin, started raising his family, and building his business. These photos were taken in Stevens Point, and I don't know exactly where, but you can picture Frank there in his overalls on one of our local lakes. And to the right is his son, David. And I'm sharing David because I was granted these photos. When I was doing research, I discovered that after Frank retired, he and the family moved to California. And so I just Googled, Spolenka, California, and I was lucky enough to find his grandson, Greg. Greg also had a website. He's an artist with some remarkable work. And I sent him a message and said, hey, I think I found your grandpa and I'm really curious about him. Do you happen to have a photo? Greg didn't just send me a photo. He sent me a book of photos that Frank's daughter, Marianne, that they had put together from her photos. She was a photographer, and just gorgeous work from the 40s and when she was a child to her raising her children. It was hard to choose which ones to show you, but David was Greg's father. I also was able to speak with Sharon, Greg's sister, and they shared a lot about the family with me. And I'm actually looking forward to learning more after the presentation. I just really had to focus and not go all Spolenka on this. Greg said that he was a fun-loving guy, but also very stern. He wasn't really known to smile in pictures unless he was goofing around. But he worked hard, and his first recorded commission was in 1905 when he designed the parsonage for St. Casimir's Church in the town of Hull. Sorry, I don't have a photo of that. Another early job that's relevant right now to changes in Stevens Point was in 1909, he did carpentry work in the interior of the new, at the time, St. Joseph's Convent. As you may know, that building is being repurposed. Create is in there. Different things are happening. So Frank's woodwork is hopefully still shining. He was also the contractor for the masonry work on the new building of the automatic cradle building in 1916. I could tell you like so many buildings he built, like houses, churches, schools, again, it would just take forever. This is his sons and his wife. And his wife, Mamie Cluck, was from, I believe, north of Stevens Point, but there are plenty of Clucks still in the Portage County area. So there is likely still family here. Throughout Frank's career, he just kept building. And this is in 1912, he built a school building and sister's residence for the St. Mary's Fancher Church. The building is now being used as a schoolhouse again, the Central Sands High Community School, which is where I got this photo. Now, there was a fire in 1934. So Frank's work is not necessarily here. I don't know, but it said it was rebuilt. I didn't have time to dig into all the photos and the research, but I will. But I have to assume that since this is similar in style to a lot of his other work, that this is at least reminiscent of what Frank built out there. I think it's very cool that an old schoolhouse is being used again for such a great school. Throughout Frank's career, he designed schools for places including the town of Sharon, Dewey, Buena Vista, Junction City, Ogdensburg, and more. He also designed St. Stanislaus Parish and Parsonage. The church plans were accepted in 1917 and the parsonage in 1923. I found this postcard image online. It seemed easier than trying to get a a current photo, and it really showcases it beautifully. I love old postcards. Some of the other churches he designed included St. Wenceslaus in Millador. He helped remodel St. Patrick's Church in Lanark, St. Xavier's in Pepin, St. Bronislava's in Plover, one in Galloway, the Polish Catholic Church, and more. In 1928, he built the Price and Boyer Funeral Home on the corner of College and North 3rd Avenue in Stevens Point. This no longer exists. I don't even know when it was torn down. This is one that was new to me, and I like funeral homes. But this was a Frank Spolenka design. He also designed St. Adelbert's Church in Rosholt in 1935. This sketch blueprint, I'm not sure what it is, sketch was also provided by the family. So thank you, Greg and Sharon. This is remarkable. I didn't make it out to Rosholt. Again, the weather has been awful here. If you're not local, I know I had some people tuning in from other places. It was bitterly, bitterly cold, and now it's been very, very windy. So all of my outdoor exploration as a disabled person got put on hold. But I'm excited to go and get some pictures of this building. He also designed the water department building that was built in 1935. This was built with WPA funds. It was a big deal. Like, to get it built, there was office space in it. There were meetings. The town was really, really excited about it. Of course, it no longer stands. But his father, John, was actually the masonry contractor on this. So Frank designed it, and John got to build it. So why am I talking about Frank, just besides all of these cool things on a cemetery tour? Because Frank was the contractor who built the gates at Forest Cemetery. He did not design them. They were designed by, just a second, I don't remember this off the top of my head, R.D. Mann of Chicago. I knew it was Mann. But these are the Week gates, the Week Memorial gates. Andrew Week was a lumberman, pioneer, manufacturer, banker, citizen, and friend, esteemed for his practical resourcefulness and broad civic interests, no less than for his wide intelligence and integrity. When he died in 1917, he left the largest fortune in county history, close to $500,000. In his will, he left many, many gifts, including $10,000 to Frame Presbyterian Church, $5,000 to the Carnegie Library, and also left many of his employees from the lumber company money from $100 to $500 in recognition of old-time friendship and their long and faithful service on behalf of the John Week Lumber Company. And I just have to say, that's awesome. The millionaires taking care of their people, and they're being friends and being so appreciated. That's one thing I really love. And again, obituaries and newspaper articles, take them with a grain of salt, but they really gave people their credit before and after they died. And communities were smaller and different, and people really came together in unique ways. But these gates were built as a memorial from his children, and because his varied, useful, and distinguished career left its ineffable mark on the institutions and progress of central Wisconsin, graven not upon stone, but upon the hearts of man. But then his kids built him something in stone. Unfortunately, these gates are deteriorating. That happens. No matter how good Frank was, no matter how good the stone, that central Wisconsin stone with Bedford coping, it is in Gothic style. It's architecturally beautiful, but it's just falling apart. And it needs a lot of work and a lot of care. This is something that a lot of people have reached out to me about, and I'm grateful for it because I'm the cemetery lady, right? And so I have things in the works for how I'm going to proceed with the cemeteries and caretaking and preservation and all the things I want to do, but this is not like the time and place. There are many concerned citizens. There are a couple of groups of people working on solutions. Since the cemetery is like cared for by the Parks Department, but this is not going to be in the Parks Department budget. There's going to be funds that need to be raised. There's going to be bids and things like that. And I appreciate everybody who's like reached out. At this time, neither I nor the Historical Society is involved in fundraising or anything. I'm happy to answer questions about it if I can, and I will absolutely share when restoration or fundraising or whatever needs to happen, it happens, because I care about this a lot. I've been wanting to clean these and make them beautiful, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done, even on the parts that aren't falling apart right now. We can get this done, and I think we should, because they're beautiful, right? And they're hard work, and they were a gift. But the truth is, not everything can be saved. Not every building, not every monument. And maybe that's why I'm so attached to stories, because I can save more of those. I can do that sitting here in my recliner in my living room. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to work hard and try to help get these restored. This is the backside. If you look closely, you can see a pile of stone that the parks guys stacked behind it. So if possible, they could be used to help rebuild it. This is forest at sunset last summer. Remember summer? Remember it? We had it for like a minute. Sunset at Forest Cemetery is my favorite thing. And it's really special that I get to share this with you. Because if I'm remembered for being the cemetery lady, if that is my legacy, that's cool. But what's cool to me about it is that I am connecting with you, that we care about this together. We care about these people. We care about these places, and we want to do things to keep them alive however we can. Whether it's a cemetery, whether it's a building you care about, we can all do this. Like, what I do isn't for everybody, but it's not special. And I don't say that in a self-deprecating way. I say that in a sincere way, that we all have our gifts. We all have things to share, and just do it. I just started going to cemeteries for me, and it grew into so much more. And the community that I have found through the Historical Society, through its supporters, through the DAR chapter, through all of you that come to my Facebook page and come to these presentations and come to the tours. Like, we're all in this together. If we all care about this, we can fix it, right? We can fix that gate. We can save these stones that are falling. We can do this all together. Like, I promise. So legacies are cool, but what matters is doing it now. I don't care if I'm remembered in 20 or 30 or 40 years. I care that right now I'm doing something that matters to me, and that matters to my kids, and that matters to my community, and that matters to you. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. I want to extend special thank yous to Kristen from the Roswell Blanchard family, Greg and Sharon from the Spolenka family, especially for Marianne's beautiful photos. I want to thank Elle, Liz, and Casey for getting me those photos and for being my sounding board for these stories. I found online resources from the Wisconsin Historical Society, Find a Grave, newspapers.com, Ancestry, online books, and just lots and lots of searches. Thank you to Leap Nonprofit Consulting, Ricky, for supporting this presentation. I really appreciate it. Nonprofits are where it's at. And I want to offer a special thanks to Cheyenne, John, and everybody at PCHS. The work they do is remarkable. The way the organization is growing, the way they reach out to the communities to educate. Get on their mailing list, become a member. Not only like, is it good for me? Because then you're going to know when my tours are. You can find out all the other remarkable things they're doing in the concerts and stay in the loop. So I know I talked kind of long. Thank you for hanging in with me. I promise I kept it as short as I could. And I love being here. Thank you. I don't hear you, John. John.
You hear me now.
Now I hear you. Now I got
there we
you.
Go. I clicked the button so I'd make sure I didn't, interrupt your presentation. But round of applause. Wonderful. Just so great to see all this research. We've done cemetery tours just at Forest Cemetery, and now I kind of like, how can we get into some of these other places?
I
How
know.
can we get you into some of it? Because there's so many. There are dead people everywhere.
You're not wrong.
So we have some questions. So I have the ticker up. Like, please enter some questions because we're going to do a quick Q&A, and then this thing goes off into YouTube heaven. So it goes, which is great. But
Yes.
We had a good one from Caitlin, who was complimentary of your work. But she wants to know, what resources have you found most helpful when researching historical records for these early residents interred in Portage County? Like, where do you go? Like, what's your process look like?
Usually I start with newspapers.com, which does require a subscription. But I got one. So if you're my friend, come on over.
Don't tell them.
No. Well, I'll tell Caitlin. I know Caitlin, so she can come over. Newspapers.com is a great place to start because there you can find obituaries, marriage things, if they went to school, things like that. But when you go way back, there's not a lot of newspapers. We're lucky that in Portage County, there are a few old books, the history of the county or the history of central Wisconsin. I was reading one of General Ellis's, and a lot of those, it's just an internet search, just I put the name in and these books come up on Google Books now. So you don't even need to own them. And so really, like newspapers, internet searches, and ancestry. If you're tracing a tree, I find a lot of birth dates, death dates, confirmation on Ancestry. Now, when it's not your family, you can't add to it, you can't save it, but you can view it. And so I find that a really good way to put the families together, especially way back, especially if you want to know that you're descended from Sir Isaac Newton's uncle. That's an Ancestry tool. So
I'll also add into that, like, so we have two great resources outside of like digital things too. Well, they're both digital too, but or can be. Is the UWSP archives, and then that is actually where if people want to view any of our archives during like daylight, you can view those through WSP. And so if you want to go over to the university and like, I don't like kid you, if you reach out to an archivist, they are the most excited people. They are
absolutely.
Like, oh, people want to go through our stuff. That's great. And so if there's stuff that if you reach out to us and we're like this at the university or whatever, we'll lead you there. And that's also, depending on what you're looking for, might be free or low charge.
Yes.
So yeah. That's cool.
Yes.
I think that's the big thing though, is like, I think as people get started in a genealogical journey, it's tough to get started sometimes.
It is. And the Portage County Public Library has some really good online resources.
Sure.
Those old books that I mentioned by Ellis, who, they're hard to read because they're old timey, but I found those on the library website. So.
Absolutely. Well, and I like my grandpa was from Marshfield, and we had some hours over there. I was killing time, and I went into the library in the research room, and it's like a shot of lightning when you find your family's name in like a directory.
Yes.
It's cool. Yep. It's like super cool. It's like, oh my God, now I want to go find out where they lived. Like that's, I don't know.
Yep. Where they live, what they do. You start looking at census records. Exactly. So you can see, like who their neighbors were. Like there's just always
Exactly.
another level of connection.
Exactly. Let's do, so we don't have a ton of questions here. I can come up with questions too. But so I just want to put, so Dustin Kitzman says he's always out and about in the county. Let me know if you need a picture. So Dustin is a
I
sheriff.
will. Dustin is a
And
great
so
guy. Hi, Dustin.
Dustin is. So Dustin did a great project with the sheriff's office. So if you walk into the sheriff's department across from the courthouse, there's a whole wall of all the sheriffs and the years they served and the pictures he could find. And he's the one who put that together.
It's remarkable.
And so Dustin's a cool dude. So,
he is a good guy.
and I'm not saying that just to get out of a free future ticket. That's just.
See, now you're not.
No. Okay. So I think this is your daughter. Or no, so this is yes, it is. So what
It's my
yes. So what can us adoring cemetery fans do to support your cause?
Well, you can go to cemeteries and take pictures for me, Eleanor. What you can do is follow Point of the Past. If you are in the position to donate to myself or to the Historical Society to support our preservation efforts, my cleaning is going to be completely fundraised this year. I do not have a budget this year. The things are different. Sharing posts, I know that social media is hairy, but the way we can change that is share some good things. Share the history, tell people. If you're at a cemetery, you can pull weeds around stones. If you pull long grass and weeds around stones, that's going to help prevent mower damage because they don't have to get as close. I have made Eleanor pull creeping Charlie out, invasive plants from cemeteries, garbage, educating people about how to not damage stones, how to care for their family stones. And even if that means sending them to me or to another preservationist or historian, there are a lot of ways to support the cemeteries. And supporting the cemeteries is supporting me. I want to take care of them. I love doing the work. I love being there alone, but I also love teaching people. So the more of us that can do preservation the right way and save the stories, the better.
Awesome. Love that. I have one personal question, not personal. This would be a professional question too. Frank Spolenka.
Yes.
Will you write a book about him for the Historical Society?
I might. Like I said,
because there seems to be, there's not a lot of like definitive architects, right? We have a kind of we're central, right? So there's like there's a lot of influence from all different places. We have architects from Milwaukee, Green Bay, all these things. And as you were talking, I'm like, this might be the guy.
He might be the guy. As I said, I'm excited to correspond a little bit more with Greg and Sharon. Sharon mentioned that she had been to Stevens Point many years ago to see some of the buildings and things like that. And I was very excited to learn more about it, but needed to focus on what I had. But whether I write a book or not, I definitely am going to be learning more and seeing if they would love to share the pictures with all of us here in Portage County. It just a really kind family, and like the photos I didn't share, just beautiful. Just it's a like Frank. The list was this long, John. I couldn't even list, and I didn't have them all. So I think we definitely, as historians, need to learn more about Frank Spolenka.
Well, let's that be the parting message. Thank you to you, Jen. Thanks for this hard work. Stay tuned for more cemetery tours, like in-person ones. They're so. I hope that we get to see all of you on those. And thanks to Leap Nonprofit Consulting for sponsoring the program. And thanks for all you for tuning in. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, John.